Hey, babe, and welcome to the Peripeteia podcast, a talk show for women. This is the place to talk about how we're ditching our bad habits, long-held patterns, and limiting beliefs. The time is now to stop outsourcing and start insourcing our happiness and bliss. Am I right? I'm Heather Lowe, your empowering life coach, ready to guide you on this incredible journey of self-discovery, empowerment, and freedom. If you're feeling stuck in the cycle and wondering what life could look like if you liberated yourself, well, I've got something just for you. I created a free guide to help you take those first empowering steps towards a healthier and more fulfilling life, the one that you desire. This guide is packed with practical tools, mindset shifts, journal prompts that dig deep, and real-life insights to support you in making changes that truly stick. So if you're ready to explore what's possible, head over to ditchthedrink.com and grab your free guide today. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. And if you want a group of babes to journey with, I've got you there too. We're staying connected through the Ditch the Drink Insider app with private forums, weekly group calls, master classes, live workshops, book clubs, in real life events, and more. And the best part is you can join for free with a 7-day trial. I'd love to continue the conversation on the inside. Now, let's dive into today's episode and get inspired to create the life you deserve, like so many other babes are doing right now. Here we go. Welcome, Bonnie Violet, to the Peripeteia podcast. I'm so excited to have you. Thank you for showing up to have this conversation with me. I really, really appreciate it. We are having this conversation on my 7-year soberversary. So I feel like that, thank you for the applause. I feel like that's meaningful and special. And for me, this year, 7 years, plus being 2025, the year of the snake, is like shedding a skin. It feels like of transformation, a spiritual awakening, like a whole thing of like a final closure on maybe like the past 7 years, shedding the skin and moving into something new. Some people say that like every 7 years our cells regenerate. So like physically, I might not be the same person that I was 7 years ago. And I just think that that's so freaking cool. And I thought that's so relatable to you because you have a recovery story, but you also have a story of being transgender. So identity and shedding skin and literally physically becoming someone new is also part of your story. And that's what we're here to talk about today.
Awesome. Great. Yeah. And congrats on 7 years. That's a really long time. And I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too. So can you share a little bit about your journey and what led you to embrace your identity as a trans woman?
Yeah. It's such a long journey. I grew up in a small town in Idaho of like 3,000 people. 46 years later, because that's how old I am, the town still has around 3,000 people. Not the same 3,000 people, but
I'm from a town of 3,000 people in Wisconsin, so we have that in common as well.
Yeah. So growing up there as a trans person, it was definitely not something I saw around me. And so I never really, I think, got to see myself. And a lot of my growing up, there was a lot, my dad was an addict, an alcoholic. There was a lot of trauma and like, it was a very chaotic environment. And so I blocked out much of my childhood. I don't remember anything before the age of 12.
Your protection.
Yeah. And I didn't really know why. For whatever reason, it was just like at 12 years old. There was the death of a good friend of mine and my aunt in the same year. It was like kind of the first time I was old enough to experience death. And I don't know, for whatever reason, life kind of began for me in my memories, at least at that time in my life. And then going through, junior high and high school, that sort of stuff. I was a kind of an overachiever. I was all about like perfect attendance and good grades. And, I grew up in a trailer in a small town in a house full, we're a poor family. We weren't Mormon, and so that made us uncool too. We weren't Catholic. That made us uncool too. So there were a lot of things that kind of like, in little small towns, there's like these little social orders or whatever. And there were a lot of things that kind of took us further down the pole. And so growing up kind of in that environment, my value and my worth was something that I think I always really struggled with feeling like I wasn't good enough or I wasn't worthy enough or I had to do more in order to kind of be like everyone else or to at least be at the same level or potentially to move us up a level or two, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Who's us? Do you have siblings? Is it siblings or your mom?
Yeah, it would
Tell
be
me
like
more about your
my mom
family.
and my mom and my dad and my younger brother who was 2 years younger than me.
Okay.
That was pretty much like our main family. Growing up in small towns, I had lots of cousins I grew up with and aunts and uncles, and a lot of the family lived in the same small town. So we all were very close and very tight. And so
Okay. And were you all not cool because you weren't Catholic and poor and all those the social status things? Does that go for your whole family or just your little group of four?
yeah, I mean, I feel like that was kind of the overall status of the family,
Okay.
at least especially from my perception
Yeah.
as a young kid. I just definitely saw that I was like this poor kid who was part of this poor family who,
Okay.
there was family history that kind of also placed us in this position in the community. My dad was the drug dealer. There were a lot of
And
there were a lot of things that kind of made me feel as if we weren't quite as I don't know, like there was stuff I needed to do to be better. And so growing up in that environment as well too, my parents were great, wonderful, loving people. They did do the best that they could. And
Mhm.
that wasn't great always. They were never
Yeah.
physically violent and we always had what we needed. Emotionally, not so much. Spiritually, of course, I think, but physically, I guess we had what we needed. But there was definitely things that like they just didn't know. When I started going to school, getting good grades, planning on going to college, maybe moving out of moving out of the town to go to college and do those sorts of things. I worked really hard to get honors and awards to do that, but my family couldn't really tell me what I needed to do with that. And so it was like time to graduate. And it was like, okay, I got my letter, I got the grades, I got the honors, I did the things, but then I never applied for school or never really did the things to get into school. And so I ended up going to a tech school in Arizona to begin studying architectural drafting because that was something that I thought I wanted to do.
So your parents, they had their own struggles. So they did the best they could with you, but they were so overwhelmed with their own that you didn't get the kind of support that you did deserve as a child and
Yeah.
you did need as a child. And they weren't capable of that. And it's not because they didn't love you, it's because they didn't know how themselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of the
Yeah.
times they didn't have the answers when I needed help. And for whatever reason, I was always positioned in the family in which they said, my mom said they never worried about me. They never worried that they didn't think I needed help in the ways that my brother did or my father did or the neighbor lady did, or you know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
I think there
You
was
were
a lot of,
ambitious. It sounds like you were very
yeah.
ambitious, very responsible. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was like,
Perfectionist.
yeah, and it was like this idea. And for me, it was confusing because I had questions and I didn't know and I didn't feel confident. And, I was learning and yet everyone around me was telling me, oh, you're fine, you're good, you're great. And I was doing a lot of things to create that perception as well. And so I think that really fed into a lot of, I think, what made it difficult for me into adulthood and later on through life is really kind of working through that idea of how to ask for help,
Mm.
recognizing when I need help, being able to ask the people around me for support and help. I think that's what recovery really did for me. When I, got away from using drugs and alcohol, I think that was what really opened up, I guess, the opportunity for me to begin to learn how to do that and get the results from that.
Totally. Well, yeah, it sounds like you were in a position and you took it of
Yeah.
um, being like a high achiever. And in the family, you were going to change your circumstances despite what your
Yeah.
family was doing. You were pretty determined to do that from a young age. Firstborn, a lot of that is like typical firstborn behavior, right? And being responsible. Maybe you took care of little brother a little bit. The parents were not available.
Yeah.
When did you find alcohol? I'm assuming it was alcohol, and you kind of got mixed up with alcohol and drugs. You have a recovery
Yeah.
story. Did that start early? Tell me a little more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up around with a family, so sipping beers and like having a shot of whiskey or those sorts of things were commonplace as a kid. My dad got me drunk first when I was a toddler. I don't remember this, but my mom told me that we both came home drunk and I was not in a good condition. And then at 16 years old, I drank and I drank poorly. I ended up with alcohol poisoning and almost died that first night when I was 16 years old and I really drank. And then I kind of just stayed away from it for a while. Graduated high school and moved out to Arizona to go to school. And then when I was 19 years old, I got infected with HIV. And I found out right around the time I turned 20. And then that's when drugs came into my life because I'd been around drugs my whole life. I had always felt like my dad had lived a difficult life. He had abusive parents and lots of violence and different things. And so I always felt like he had a reason to use. And I finally had one. I was scared to death of dying of AIDS. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know that I could live. There were a lot of fears that kind of came up, and being somebody who was like an overachiever, who was doing all these great things, who was smart, who was, good looking, young kid at the time, it was like, how did I get HIV? And so it was really, it was a blow to the ego, and also to like just the dreams and hopes and vision that I had for myself and for my family. And so and I felt like I had really let them down, and myself down. And I think, and then also God, at that point, God had always been a big part of my life. I said, we weren't Mormon, we weren't Catholic, but I did go to church as a kid. No one else in my family did. I always say it's the first queer thing I did. And it was a safe place for me. So I often didn't feel safe at home or comfortable at home or school. And so church was just a safe, soft place for me to land. And so I spent a lot of time in church, in my teens, and then even into my early adulthood.
Bonnie Violet, you were a seeker. You were always a spiritual seeker. And then you were diagnosed with HIV. And I want to go back and learn a little more about all of this, but you felt like you had done something wrong. That's how it felt shameful to you, it sounds like.
Yeah, there was a lot of shame around it, in parts because, I couldn't really talk to anyone about it. There was the aspect of, having sex. It was queer sex, so it was like a combination of, yes, I have HIV, but then it also, at the time I was living as a man, I understood myself as a man. So then I was a gay man, and so the getting HIV was like the thing that pushed me kind of out of the closet and pushed me into a place of owning this part of myself that I don't know I was fully ready for. But it kind of made it to where I had to kind of move forward. And so I think that's also why I landed in being gay for so long and never transitioned until my 40s, because I just thought, oh, I'm feminine. I'm carry myself this way. Like, it's like, oh, I can just be a gay guy because gay guys are kind of feminine and, all that sort of stuff. And so it kind of felt like it was a safer place for me to be as a effeminate boy, I guess, to be as a gay guy versus like a straight guy. And so I think it was just a safer place for me to land and to start to build community.
So, and forgive me if I use the wrong words and correct me if I use the wrong words, but growing up, you felt like a feminine boy. Is that how it felt to you? Is that who you were like at 12?
Yeah. So I didn't have the words for it.
Right.
I was very soft and effeminate in my childhood. I was constantly getting a big thing of why I didn't feel safe at home is that I was constantly getting corrected as far as like where I was putting my hands, like if my hands were on my face, or if I wasn't talking loud enough, or how I sit, or how I was expressing myself in feminine ways. I don't even know if my father realized that's what was happening, but he was constantly correcting or telling me I needed to not do that. And so man
up a little bit, maybe.
Yeah,
even.
totally. Yeah. And I didn't have that perspective at that time of my life. But yeah, it was definitely like he was trying to raise me to be a man who could, take care of himself and the family and, that sort of stuff. Like to be the kind of guy that he was.
And you just felt like you were wrong because you were doing it wrong. You were
I
putting
felt
you were
I
getting
felt
corrected all the time.
Yeah, I felt very wrong and I didn't understand that aspect. And then I also, because of trauma when I was a kid, I would cry a lot. And so my dad, if there was ever any potential, like if he raised his voice or if I was potentially there was a conflict around me, I would cry and I would cry hysterically and I couldn't do anything about it. And it would just make the thing worse.
Yeah.
And then it would just build and build. And I just thought I was broken or something. Like I had no understanding of what was happening to me or why I was the way I was. And I hadn't remembered the trauma, nor did anyone tell me in my family that it had happened. And so
Right.
I didn't learn that until like my mid-20s. And then I was like, oh, that's why that is there versus like, I just thought I was flawed in some way. Like I really didn't understand why I was the way I was.
Mm-hmm. And then you had a conversation with yourself at some point, it sounds like, where you made a decision that I'm going to be a gay man, or I guess this is where I fit. When was that? Tell me about that. That at that point, that was your understanding of yourself.
Yeah, I was right. It was when I was 20, just before I was diagnosed with HIV. I'd kind of decided for myself, okay, I'm a gay man. I dropped out of Bible school. I was going to university to be a pastor at that time. And I dropped out of that. And then I was like, okay, my last girlfriend dumped me because I wouldn't have sex with her. And so it was like, she was hurt and I didn't want to hurt her because I cared about her. And I was like, you need to figure out your stuff. And so I was like, I guess I must be gay. And so I got a job at a gay bar to learn how to be gay.
Oh my gosh. So this relationship taught you. So up until that point, you had been dating women or having relationships with women, you as a man feeling something about that, right?
I didn't feel, like I wasn't really drawn to them sexually. And we never got that far. And part of me just thought that's because I was spiritual and Jesus and waiting till marriage kind of stuff. But I think there was also a part of me that just was like, this isn't quite right,
Yeah.
But I didn't know why or how. And so then I was like, okay, I must be gay. I got a job at a gay bar to learn how to be gay because I'd never been around gay people. I didn't know what it meant. I just knew that I felt drawn toward men sexually. I felt attracted to them. And I just was like, and that felt natural in the beginning. Yeah. It was a natural instinct. In the beginning, I thought it was like a demonic possession, but I was able to come to understand that it was just my nature. It was just what was created in me for whatever reason. And the sooner I could begin to embrace that and be okay with that, the better, I could be in life too.
That sounds like a big turning point to decide you're a gay man and then learn how to be gay. I mean, that's sort of funny, right? That you're
and then I
learn how. So did you learn? Teach me. What do you like?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really learn too much.
Okay.
I learned you don't really learn.
Okay.
I was diagnosed with HIV like a couple months after I came out. And so that also changed my experience of just being a gay man at that time.
So now fast that happens, right?
Person, I'm poisonous, I'm toxic. So the idea of me being in relation with anyone, friendship, especially lovers or romantic, like that was like off the table because I was this diseased, poisonous, toxic person. At least that was my
decide to like claim yourself as a gay man, just when you start to feel what feels natural and you go with it so quickly, that happened. And then more of there's something wrong with me. And now I'm contagious. I can't be around anybody. More isolation for you. And I'm guessing you already felt so alone.
Yeah, I felt very alone in a lot of ways because now I was part of these communities that I didn't know anything about. I remember I was so young. I remember going to the HIV clinic there for the first time to really, because I knew nothing about it. And I remember going there and like, it was a clinic full of people who all had HIV and we all were young. There were a lot of young people and they had like, because this was 1999. So this was like, it was the 90s. It was a while ago, but it was still kind of like growing up in Idaho. The only thing I knew about AIDS was like from the 80s and like the movie Philadelphia and stuff.
The movie, I was going to say, yeah.
And I remember going to this clinic, and I was always petrified. I would wear the same outfit. I wore a pair of bib overalls that helped me feel safe, I think, and almost like a kid, I guess. And then I threw like this yellow backpack on that I called my backpack of death. And every time I went to the doctor, they would give me all this crap to read and learn. And I would just throw them in that bag and then go home and throw it in the closet and then pick it back up and go again. And one of these times, this nurse was trying to, I think, comfort me. And she's like, "Isn't it so great that everyone here is just like you? As in, like, everyone here in this clinic has HIV like you?" And I'm like, "No, that guy can't see. That guy is in a wheelchair. That person is, I'm just like, no, like I'm seeing my life in front of me in the different stages. You know what I mean?" And I was always I was never afraid of dying. I was afraid of doing what it was that I wanted to do before I died. So I was more afraid of that, not knowing what it was I wanted to do. And then the other aspect, I was also more concerned about having some sort of this disability, I guess, before my death. So having to live blind or having to live in a wheelchair or having to, like, for me, I would have just rather died. I couldn't understand how I could live in a different form, I guess. Yeah, it was a very confusing, very scary time for me, and drugs really helped soften the blow of life. I think drugs and alcohol were a gift at that time of my life, and I think it really gave me life, and it afforded me life in a way that I was not able to do it on my own. I don't know that I would have ended my own life, but I don't think I would have begun living. And to me, living is more than just breathing. Like, it's actually being excited about life and friends and being connected and like having purpose. And drugs and alcohol began to do that for me because it put me in circles with other queer people and queer people who owned and loved who they were, and they didn't have shame, and some of them even believed in God and stuff. You know what I mean? And so, like, I began to learn that I could exist in the way that I truly was, because I really felt like I was somehow not good enough for God. I was somehow soulless or evil, or, it was this that I was going to die. I'd let down my family. There was just a lot of really negative things, and drugs kind of took that out of my mind enough to kind of like live.
So interesting that you feel like you have limited time now because of this diagnosis. So you kind of want to like hurry up and get in everything you've ever wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And also you're going to drugs and alcohol because you can't stand what's happening to you, and and you're looking for places to connect, and you don't know how, and you're lost and confused and scared, right?
Yeah.
So also if you had limited time, you're using it with drugs and alcohol, kind of jumping ship on yourself.
Yeah, in some ways, I'd always been able to rely on God and had a spiritual way of life. And then I would no longer had access to that, and I didn't know how to exist. And drugs and alcohol then kind of became, I don't know if that's why they call them spirits, but they became my substitute for
because you thought you had the devil in you in the form of HIV.
Yes, and they allowed me to feel joy and to feel pride and to feel, all the sorts of things that I once felt with God and felt in spirituality, but somehow felt like I didn't have access to anymore. And it taught me that I could still, I often say that I think that was the time that I actually fell into grace. To me, grace is this idea that I don't have to do anything to earn value or worth, that I have the same value and worth that we all have, that we're equal and we're balanced in that way. There's nothing I can do to change that, to remove it or build more, even though much of my life I was always trying to prove my worth or do more for my worth, and getting HIV just exacerbated that even more. And so, and then I was like going to church every Sunday and Wednesday and reading the Bible and praying and doing this and doing that in order to receive grace, which is contrary to what grace is all about. And so when I actually started to stop doing those things because I was told I couldn't because I was queer, then grace, I was actually able to experience grace and what it was like to still have value and still have worth without having to do all the things in order to be worthy.
That's such a beautiful explanation of grace, and I need that today. I think we all do, right? And many of my listeners I know are perfectionists and high achievers and ambitious, and we think we have to do all these things to earn our worth, and we don't. And
No.
so we are worthy as we are in whatever shape, form, productivity, that
Yeah,
we
yeah.
offer, whatever that looks like. So that's a really beautiful lesson. So drugs and alcohol, I'm guessing, were helpful to you until they weren't.
Yeah.
Tell us about the turning point with that.
Yeah, at 27 years, I guess I was 29 years old. At 29 years old, I was living back in Boise. I was living in Boise, Idaho. I was running an HIV/AIDS organization that I created when I was 24. I had just left my husband, and it was Mother's Day, and I just, for whatever reason, that morning I woke up, I was hungover, which was not new. I had slept with someone who was not my partner, who was not my monogamous partner, who also worked for me, who, like, there was just my morals and values I was failing at. And for whatever reason that day, I was just like, I can't do this anymore. And it wasn't a new feeling. I'd found myself there before, and it was just like, I really don't know what to do about this. And I'm not okay, because the things I care most about, I was failing at. I was a liar in my relationship. I was, there were just things that in my core values, I was falling short, and I didn't know how to do anything different. And so someone told me they thought I had a drinking problem. And I was like, yes, that's it. That's why I do these horrible things, is because I'm drunk. And it's like, and that was helpful in the beginning, because it took me a while to really accept that I was an alcoholic or a drug addict, that I could really be powerless over the substances. But I definitely thought life was unmanageable, and I didn't know how to get different results. And recovery really helped me to begin to do different things, which then did get me to begin to have different results. Many of which I didn't enjoy, but were so important for me being able to move forward in living. And it kind of jumps through a little bit further, but I do believe that I've actually, I had to transition in order to remain sober, and in order to continue to be honest and live life in a way in which I want to still exist, So I see my transness and me living into it as a spiritual awakening, that it's me just, awakening to who I am more, and being willing to express more of who I am. Whether I've always been, I don't know. I can look throughout my life and see that there's evidence that I've always been a trans person. But it doesn't necessarily matter, because I do believe that I've awakened to the idea that I am a trans person. And in that, I don't know, it's just it's hard to really explain, because I didn't see it until I saw it. And when COVID happened, and I was isolated in San Francisco and away from all my family, and, and just isolated, got me thinking, what if I die? What if they die? What if, and I was afraid that I would lose them if I came out as I was realizing I was trans, and then I was like, yeah, but can I live as a trans? If I do this, I'll probably lose my family. I'll lose love. I'll lose sex. I'll lose my position in community. I'll lose everything. And, and it was it was it to not transition at that point was worse than any of that stuff happening, because once I transitioned, that all came true. Everything changed, and I lost almost every relationship and position, and everything did change drastically. But I began to feel and live and reside in my body in a way that I never had, sober or high. So for me, it was just me beginning to be able to embody more of who I am. Because even though I was, 10 plus years sober and had done a lot of work, I still was very dissociated and very much not living in my body. Most of the time I was a very heady person, and but to actually embody my body, until I started doing drag and I had opportunities to put on clothing that was opposite, And like, I just never wanted to get out of it. And the more that I did it, the more I realized that this was just, I want to be this way all the time. Like this feels good to be this way all the time. I want to be called she all the time because it hits this spot in me that just, I feel seen. I feel seen when somebody calls me Bonnie Violet or uses she pronouns. Like, my parents don't do that. Many of my
Mm.
friends don't do that from the past, and so
Mhm.
I don't feel like they see me. And
Mhm.
it makes it very difficult to, I think, continue to be in relationship with a lot of the people of the past.
Wow, you risked everything. And Bonnie Violet, I don't know if anybody can see, but your face lights up of joy and empowerment when you talk about being in drag or being Bonnie Violet. And I think that's really interesting because I think the question everybody has is, did you always know? Or were
Mm,
you always like this? Or were you born a girl or something like that? And what you're telling us is, I didn't know until I knew. And looking back, this is what's right for me in this moment. This is who I
mhm.
am right now. So it kind of doesn't matter. You
Yeah,
were surviving as best you could in the environments that you were in. But now that you know, you can't unknow. Now that you know how
yeah.
good that feels to be who you are and to be in your body, you can't undo that, even though it means risking a lot. Uh,
Mhm. It's more risky to not, though. I've
Tell me
reached a
more.
point in my life that it's more risky to not transition and not, embody myself. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
it was definitely, it just got to the point where there was no other choice
Mhm.
to do that, and life is that way sometimes where yes, we always have choice and we always have options. But there really isn't a choice when it came down to it.
Yeah, you had to. Yeah. So you were so brave. You went from deciding to be a gay man and then very quickly getting diagnosed with HIV and then feeling terrified of that to then becoming a married gay man and a HIV advocate in Boise, Idaho, which
Mhm.
is that's a pretty brave thing to do, I think,
Yeah.
right? And a leader. And then you were brave enough to say, I was also using drugs and alcohol, and I cheated on my husband and with somebody I worked. Like I did all these things that it's really honest of you to share that.
Mhm.
Most of us keep all of that private, right? But you're willing to say that out loud. I did all these things, and
I
then it
have.
brought you into recovery.
Yeah. I do
And
believe
that,
so I was going to say, I do believe we are only as sick as our secrets. And I can't afford to, not that everybody needs to know all my business, but I
right.
can't afford to not be honest about who I've been and what I've done.
Owning that banishes some of the shame about that because you
Yeah.
have
And it's useful.
self-forgiveness and you can move on.
Yeah. It's useful to me and it's useful to many of the people around me to know that that's part of my past too. And that,
Yeah.
that you can live differently.
I love that. And I always say changed behavior is the best apology. So what that did for you was bring you to changed behavior. You got into recovery, right?
Yeah.
And so it sounds like you went through a 12-step program. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
found
I
a
do.
community?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of my addiction sprung from a spiritual malady,
Hmm.
through the lack of be able to have access to God or a higher power. And as a queer person, I didn't think I was eligible. And so 12 step was a spiritual solution to drugs and alcohol. And I met queer people and other people who weren't supposed to be eligible for God,
Mm.
who talked about God and talked about a higher power, and they were living lives that I didn't think were possible for people like me. And so I was like, I want that. So I think one of the things that drew me most about 12 step or even getting into recovery was this idea of having God, a different God and a different understanding of God, in my life again. Because I think that's really what I was most sad, and distraught about not having in my life.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, you were a spiritual seeker from a young age and going to church even without your family, trying to find that sort of faith in something bigger
Yep.
than you and a community of people who believed, who also believed. That was
Yeah.
always important to you.
Agreed.
When you say you saw people living a life that you didn't think was available to you, because now you have now you went from, I guess I'm a gay man to I'm a queer person, right? You kind of made that shift.
Mhm.
What was available? What did you think your life was at that time? Like, what did they have that you didn't, or what did they have that you didn't think you could have?
I think one of the biggest things was having God and spirituality and purpose um,
Okay.
in their life in that aspect. But also, of course, they had like jobs and they had relationships that they were honest in, and they were, doing things in community, and which were all things that I was doing, but I was driven by this need to validate my existence and to make up for like me being a failure. Like that was a lot of my motivation
Mm.
with things, was seeking validation, seeking affirmation, seeking what I needed for me to be okay, instead of like just being of service, which I feel like nowadays I can understand the sacred economy of like being of service, and that I can be of service in a way to get out of self, but for also the motive of helping somebody else. I don't, there's just I really feel like recovery just creates more of an awareness of what is
Mhm.
true and what is already there. So I always wanted to be a good person, and I wanted to be of service to my community. And like I always believed that I was meant to be a, a an amazing leader for God and saving people for Jesus. And like that part of me was all still in me, but my motivations and the motives, the emotions or the things that were pulling, that were stronger, that were taking over, were a little more maladaptive.
Mhm.
And so, yes, I wanted to be of service, and yes, I wanted to do these things, but my main role is I wanted to feel okay about who I was,
Mm.
and I needed outside validation to do that.
Mhm.
Then that was the cool thing, is like it started out seeking validation, and then I got it, and then I don't know, it's like I don't need it anymore in those ways that I once did. It was a beautiful maladaptive kind of response to life or dying.
Mhm.
And in the long run, which I think that's where God is, or the spirit, the whatever stuff is that I don't understand, that through that process, I received healing and an openness to where I am and how I am today, which is a lot of like what I originally thought was my spiritual meaning, but it has nothing to do with Jesus or saving people, or any of that crap that gave me so much. I don't know what the word is, what it gave me, but I can see that it's all still the same. It just looks a little different, because me starting an HIV/AIDS organization and working with young people and doing this, that, or the other is almost a lot like me going out into the world and saving people for Jesus. Actually, I was just helping people, and helping myself. And you know what I mean? Like I can look back and see that like, yeah, like maybe I thought I was going to be in churches being of service, but no, I'm at an AIDS service organization, or I'm at a needle exchange program, or I'm at a drug and alcohol research program, or you know what I mean? Like those are how I show up. Like my
Mhm.
spirituality is what calls me to do that as well.
Mhm.
I don't
Yeah.
know. I feel like I'm
I
getting.
hear you. Yeah, it's another thing we have in common. It's interesting because there's a book, What Color is Your Parachute? And it's like tells you what job would be right for you. Whenever I do a career test or something, clergy always comes up for me. And
Mm,
I'm always like, oh, that makes perfect sense because I love an audience, love attention. I want to stand and do a sermon, and I have a degree in social work. So I also am a helper. I want to be helpful, of course,
mhm.
So I'm like, oh God, that's right. But even as a sober coach, like I do my workshops, I've got my group, we've got our weekly meetings that I lead. It's the same. And you went to school to be a pastor. You were getting educated for that, right?
Very
Tell me
briefly.
more. Okay.
Yeah, very briefly.
Okay.
I just kind of like started it, and then realized I was queer, got met, like there were just some things that happened that kind of took me away from that. Now I do, like I am ordained through like the Universal Life Church, which I know sounds like whatever, but through that I've done lots of weddings and memorials, and then I've been through chaplaincy training through the
Hmm.
United Methodist Church in Chicago. And then I
Hmm.
adapted that into what I call a queer chaplain, which is a chaplain of another sort, in which I feel called to be with people around death and dying. to self versus the body. It's actually more of like around an identity shift or a coming to understand yourself in a way that no longer allows the God or the spirituality that you once knew or understood to be true. And you have to come to believe something different and something new, and kind of helping people have some sort of spirituality through that process. And it's really just about bringing an awareness to the spirituality already at play. And so that they can feel good about it as they go through it, but they also can tap into that source as they're going through the transformation.
Let's talk about this. I'm excited to talk about this. And I think you are too, because I feel just like I talked about in the beginning, let's say 7 years of sobriety and the year of the snake shedding skin. And I feel like a phoenix who rises from the ashes, just being sober. I mean, I had to burn it to the ground, right? I was terrified I was going to lose my marriage, my friends, my social life, my job. And a lot of those things came true. Like you said about your choice, was like, I have to do this, even though it risks everything that I know and that I think I know and love. I still have to do it. Same for me. I had to get sober, and a lot of my fears came true. I did lose people and things, and I'm in a totally different job. And thank God I still have my marriage. I'll credit that to him more than me, let's say, his loyalty and sticking by me and being my cheerleader. But I get that identity shift. It's really hard. I was also known as life of the party, and now I'm sober Sally, who's also still the life of the party, by the way, which of course you know. But this is in a really big way. So then you went from gay man to queer, and now you're like playing with drag, and it starts to feel like home to you. So tell me about this shift of, I'm actually a woman and my name is Bonnie Violet. Tell me more about that.
I don't, it's been a journey, because even before, when I was living as a understanding of a queer man, I would started using she, her pronouns professionally way before I transitioned or even saw myself as a trans person. Oftentimes trans people, it's very common for us to think we're not trans enough. And because we're not trans enough, as in like, I never thought I was a woman trapped in a man's body. I never wanted to like remove parts of my body necessarily, partially because I wasn't inside my body. So I didn't know what I wanted my body to be, which is a whole nother like part of the journey. But like, so because I didn't fit that narrative, I didn't feel like I was trans. All my friends used to call me she, and I just loved it. And I was like, ooh, I like that. Like it was a term of endearment. And I didn't for a long time ask people to use she pronouns, because I thought it took away from like other people who use she. Like somehow it took away from a cisgender woman's she, or a trans woman's she, or whatever. And like I wasn't she enough. And then I was like, it makes me feel good. Why wouldn't I do it? And what does my she have to do with anyone else's? Right. And so I just kind of like stuck with that for a long time. And people who knew me and loved me use she pronouns for me. And so it's been kind of a journey of kind of getting there. I think a big shift for me was I'm being in recovery. I was living in San Francisco at the time, and a drag queen friend of mine ended up taking their own life. They were dealing with drugs and addiction, and they're still in Idaho. And they passed. They died from it. And
Sorry.
I was just like, I'd always talked about doing drag or wanted to do drag. I'd actually even tried when I was younger, but I was like, it was confusing to me, because I was like, it was internalized transphobia. I didn't understand it at the time, but it was very confusing to me. So I couldn't do it. And so when he died, I was like, I just like, what am I waiting for? And so like in San Francisco, they have a show once a month that's sober people doing a drag show to raise money for recovery, people in recovery. And so I called my friend up and was like, hey, can you put me on the stage? And they're like, yeah. And so like 10 days later, I was on a stage doing Kesha's new song, Praying.
Yes, you were.
You know, and
Yeah.
then through that process, it was very scary and very vulnerable. And I had a really difficult time with it, because I felt like I was really like, I had to do very thoughtful and gender bending. And like, I was a bearded queen initially. I was like super hair. It's probably hard to imagine now, but like, I was just like this different person. I was owning it. And part of that for me was I was going through the transition of really just owning more of who I was. And I was doing it on stage. And it was an extremely vulnerable and scary situation because it wasn't just me putting on an outfit or putting on a costume and becoming somebody else. It was actually me revealing more of me.
You were being vulnerable because that was the authentic self. It wasn't a
Yeah.
show.
And through that process, most drag artists by the end of the night, they're like, I can't wait to get out of this stuff. Like, ugh, get me out of here. And I was just like, can we go out? Can we
Keep my beard.
I know I want to go to sleep like this, wake up tomorrow,
Oh.
And so at first I didn't know if it was because, like a drag queen, there's a certain amount of like celebrity, if you will, that happens with just being in public or doing this or that. It's like, you're a drag queen, And so
Mhm.
there's a lot of attention that comes from that. And so at first I wasn't sure, like, are you enjoying this because of the attention or and it was more than that because it wasn't even about when I was with people. It was more about when I was with myself. And so through that process, I just, I got more and more to where I started wearing skirts to work and started and I got to where if I didn't wear a skirt, I thought I was like being dishonest with myself or like I wasn't living to my, it was interesting because it was just such a journey. And at first I was just a guy in a skirt.
Mhm.
Or, and then eventually it was like, no, I think it's more than that. And so I see myself as I usually say a trans person, more trans feminine. I say I'm trans femme, gender queer. And for me, it's like, I'm a trans woman, I'm trans feminine, but I don't see women in a specific way or the thought to be traditional way. And so I'm more of like a queer woman.
Mhm.
It's hard. It may be hard to understand or explain, but I think part of growing up in the way that I grew up, seeing a man and a woman and what a man did and what a woman did, there's a part of me that is like probably like a trans woman. So I have to do that journey of going to be a woman, but also my understanding of what it means to be a woman is queer. And so like it can be short haired, it can be like whatever, And so I think I'm on that journey of getting to where I fit. And then the hard part is living in a place like Idaho where sometimes I want to look like a woman because it's safer. And like if I can't quite look like exactly, you know what I mean? Like a lot of people clock me, which is they see that I'm trans. But like sometimes I wonder if I want to look more like a woman, a cisgendered woman, so that so I don't get problems going to the bathroom or just being in
Mhm.
public, or so that I could just exist without my transness being the first thing that people see or the first thing that informs people on how to engage with me. But I don't know. So it's a journey. April will be 4 years starting my medical transition. So it's still all really new, and I'm still learning and coming to discover more of who I am. And, a lot of because I've had that trauma and that stuff, I don't visualize, like, I don't know how I want myself to look or, you know what I mean? But I'm excited to see. Like I intuitively started hormones because I felt like there was some sort of deficiency, like vitamin lacking in my body. And there was parts of my body that just needed some nutrients so that it could live finally, And so I started hormones, not even knowing if I wanted breasts or I wanted curves or any of these sorts of things. But I just felt like it's what I needed. And then as my body started changing, I was like, oh yes, I like this. I want more of this. You know what I mean? And so it's been kind of a, test and try it out. And living in Idaho, I've lost access to my healthcare back in July. So it's been really interesting to kind of not have access to medicine and then having to kind of almost detransition or start that process of losing curves or losing shape that was coming and trying to deal with that. And through that process, I've come to really understand that, like, yeah, I really am, like, if I ever wondered if I was trans, like, I definitely am, because I'm much more happier and content and feel more embodied
Mhm.
when I'm on that journey of, I guess, what we would call a transition,
Yeah, it sounds like a human journey to me.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, I'm sure, I mean, we'll talk about this too. I'm sure there's a stigma and you feel that wherever you go, and there's a lot of people that don't understand or haven't been in your shoes or your heels, whichever.
Yeah.
But we're all trying to figure out who we are. And why is gender so important? Leads the question.
Mhm.
Like, this is a man's job and this is a woman's job, or this is how women are and this is how men are. Some of that is not true. This is how people are. And each person I see in all sorts of relationships can be
And yet,
whoever they
right.
are, right? But
And
we've,
yet, I was going to say, and yet that's a very powerful thing in our society. Do you know what I mean? Like it plays a huge role, even if it's just some made up shit. Like as far as like
yeah,
man and woman and what it means to be a man or a woman, but it
right.
dictates a lot of things, jobs and roles and how
Right,
we
all of it. Well, I'm
behave.
going back to Free to Be You, Me, You and Me in the 70s, our film
Yeah.
strip at school, but Billy wants a doll. And
Mhm.
like that was so wrong that a boy would play with a doll. But
Yeah.
wouldn't we want to raise fathers who love their children and
Mhm.
hold a baby? There's nothing wrong with that.
Yep.
There's everything right with that. But we determined something was wrong with that, you know? So
Mhm.
I mean, that's really simplifying it, but those messages, those unconscious
Mhm.
messages, and
Yeah.
I can't help but mention the patriarchy over and
Yeah.
over again of who's in power and what it means to be what it means. But I feel like we're all trying to figure out our identity and who we
Yeah.
are, embodying ourself. And you're trying to get to a place where your insides and your outsides match, right?
Well, I think it's just a journey that we're on. You kind of talked about
Mhm.
it's like, I don't believe that I was created and my creator is done with me. I
Mhm.
feel like I'm continually being created. And the cool thing about my understanding is I'm a co-creator with my creator. We are in
Mhm.
alignment with how we see me in the world today, and me living into my transness is part of my calling and part of what God or part of what I believe creator is creating
Mhm.
me to be. I went from being a man, a white man, to being a trans white woman, but like there is a huge privilege shift that happens. And it's a journey. It's like there's stuff that you learn when you're able to live in one side to the other, and that there's so much wisdom and there's so much, like, I think that's why trans people and two-spirit people and people who've lived in this queer space in the tween of things have been like the healers and the wise people and the whatever in tribes and communities, because I think we're given a perspective that allows us to connect and not be a threat to either side. And you can even see it just with like queer men. And in a lot of the shows, you can see a gay man and he gets along with the girls and the guys still invite him into the club. And you know what I mean? And I think, I don't know, I truly believe that a big part of my spiritual calling, like I believe that I'm created to be trans in this moment in time. And I'm trans in this moment in time because those are the words for who I am. But I'm just
Right.
part of the evolution of all of us into being, I don't know. Like,
Yeah, you've come a long way, baby, because you at first you wanted to deny these things or ignore these things or try not to be these things, and you're accepting who you are. You're fully accepting who you are and going with it and feeling empowered. I think that's really beautiful. What changes would you like to see in how society understands or supports transgender people?
um,
You mentioned the media, like,
yeah, I think I would like to say that I would love for more trans and non-binary people to experience love and acceptance and affirmation from the people around them. And I would love for trans and non-binary people to be able to live a life in which their trans and non-binariness is not um, the main identifier, or the like that it doesn't have to be a thing necessarily. Not to erase it, not in a way of like being colorblind. Like, it's important for us to see that people are black and brown and to understand that they're having a different relationship because of that.
mhm,
And I think trans and non-binary people need to be seen, but we also need to also just be other human beings as well. And so I think, I don't know, that's what I want for trans people. And that's a lot of the work that I do now. I started an organization called Joy Boise. And it's really about us making and creating space for us to have joy as trans people in public for the sake of trans people, not for the gaze of the rest of the world. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And that can be hard to do, but I really trying to focus on that aspect. I think for trans people to experience joy, not as an escape from our struggle, but actually as a part of our struggle and a part of our living. I don't know, you can look and see any marginalized group over decades, and you can see that they were spiritual, they were creative, they were dancers and singers, and like some like just beautiful. So much beauty has come out of that. And,
Mhm.
I think that's something that I'm really trying to help my community really own and lean into more, especially in these times when things are getting, I mean, many of us are afraid that, pretty soon we're going to be taken and put in a camp or a jail or, and that really doesn't feel like that's a crazy thought.
Mhm.
So that it's been a really, I think we live in a really interesting time as a trans person. And sometimes I'm like, okay, creator, why did we decide it? Like, why are we doing this? But I know it's how I'm meant to be. And there's a bigger purpose. There's purpose for me, but there's a bigger purpose, I think, in me
Yeah.
existing in the way that I am, as a trans person, but also beyond that.
I understood so well. It was so interesting when you said you wanted to look like a woman because that would be safer for you. And I felt like, really, coming from a white man?
Yeah,
Like if we were in the woods and there was a bear or a man, I think a lot of us women would choose the bear, would be safer,
right,
right? So like that was a really interesting thing to say.
right. Well, and I think that
It-
also speaks to like that being a trans woman is even more vulnerable than being
yeah,
a woman.
yeah,
Or there, and
right,
again, it's not a comparison. There's just a
right,
difference because
right. But for
I know
you,
what
then, if
it's.
you were a woman, then the focus would be off trans.
Yes, well, and it's like I know what it's like to deal with the fact that a guy might think I'm attractive and then decide to hit on me or da 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 or
Hmm.
call me, or like, I have to think about, am I wearing this because I want to wear it, or if I wear this to this place, am I gonna, or if I'm walking at night by myself, all those
Yeah,
sorts of things, because if I'm perceived as a woman, then I get all the crap that women get from men.
yeah,
But
yeah,
then people think I'm a woman, and then they think, oh, I'm a man. And then they want to treat me like a man. So they want to punch me or beat me or harm me. And
yeah,
they can because they think I'm a man,
yeah,
which is a whole nother, issue.
yeah.
I think that's like the other area of vulnerability that I've come to. It's so weird how I can be more confident and feel good about who I am, and I've never been more scared of the world and more scared to go places and do things in my entire life, and yet I've never felt more in alignment with who I am in my mind, body, and spirit. It's
Mm.
such a mind fuck, if I can say
Totally.
it.
Well, you can, and that's part of my mission for this podcast is to make the whole world a safer place for you, wherever you land.
For all
Because,
of us.
yeah, for all of us, and safe and celebratory. People can
Yeah.
celebrate who they are, whatever they are, and there's a lot of joy and empowerment.
Yeah.
Are there any like role models or books or movies that have helped or inspired you along the way?
I think the thing that's been important for me was I didn't grow in environments in which I could see myself. And so it's been really important for me to see parts of me or more of me by seeing and experiencing other people. And so, there were trans women who saw me before I saw me. Mama Carol was one of those. There was like lots of trans women who saw me before I saw me. Movies like Pose really started to tell a little bit of a narrative of what it meant to grow up as trans in the 80s and 90s, and even into the nows. So Pose is something. Janet Mock is a really great author. I've read some of her books, and I really get a lot from listening to her. But really, I think the biggest thing is just trans and non-binary people that are existing, period,
Mhm.
whether it's online or at the
Mhm.
store or, at whatever.
Mhm.
I'm hosting a support group here in about an hour, and I'm so excited to meet and see other folks like myself. There's just so much
Yeah.
power and so much strength that comes from that.
Well, you living confidently as who you are, you're the person that you needed back then, right?
So totally. I mean, yeah, right. Isn't that a big part of what we do? And I've always tried to be the person that I needed. Um,
Mm-hmm.
And I think I can be a little bit more intentional. And what that looks like is it's just so different as we all grow up,
Right.
and to see things differently.
hmm What are some of the self-care practices that have helped you navigate the difficult times?
I think for me is really being able to form a chosen family. I don't have relationship with the mother and father in the way that I would like, or even my brothers or siblings, or even my nieces and nephews. And so like I have chosen family in which I'm the auntie to a trans man and non-binary person's like child. I am auntie, and so I get to experience what it's like to be an aunt with them, or I have people in my life that I can go to that are like mothers or fathers or parents. That's been really, I think, powerful for me to be able to create a chosen family and be in relation with people intentionally in that way. I light Palo Santo. And I get all the negative shit. I don't know if it does anything, but sometimes I like to do it. I light candles. I don't have a really strong sense or deity or God or religion, but I fuck with it all a little bit and just,
Mhm.
I love talking with people about their spirituality and their experience because that helps widen and expand my understanding, because I say that God often fails me, and it's not God that fails me, but it's my understanding or my experience with it.
Mhm.
Because at some point in time, I come to learn that something's not quite what I believed, or that what I know is not enough for what is
Mhm.
happening. And so getting to talk with other people in those ways really helps me stay grounded. I have people in my life that look out for me. I look for them. I still go to recovery meetings on a regular basis. I preach in churches as a drag queen, and I talk with people. And so I think it's just that it's a little bit of everything. Like my whole life, um, it my whole life is a life of recovery. And so every aspect in it is a part of me recovering, but also just living more fully and wholeheartedly and more humbly in like myself. So it's a
That's a
little bit of
beautiful definition
everything.
of recovery in itself, living more fully into you. How do you handle negative comments or misconceptions about your identity?
um I think part of that is who it comes from. Like I'm on social, so like, I'm a public facing person, so I get it on social media and stuff constantly, all the time. How do I deal with the negative? For the most part, I just kind of brush it off. There are times when it's difficult, so I stay away from it if I need to. I usually try to talk with other people who might have a similar experience so that I don't feel isolated in what I'm going through, and then I can like take the power away from it. And so I think that's been some of the biggest things of how I deal with negative uh, feelings or experiences around my transness or even recovery or just who I am. Those sorts of things that I think we all do can kind of help me. And it's not really any one of those things. It's probably like a combination of those things.
Yeah, and always think connected to your community and your chosen family. Sounds like that sense of belonging can really undo what any stranger might think
Yeah.
or say,
And
right?
I think the biggest thing for me growing up the way that I was and always wanting to be right and good and like is actually allowing myself to be in that negativity, to allow myself to be mad, to allow myself to be like not cute in
Yeah.
response to people,
Yeah.
and just give myself some grace.
Mhm.
That's okay. And that's reasonable. And in some ways it's probably more honest uh,
Yeah.
than when I wasn't and when I
Mm.
don't. So I think that's been probably one of the better things that I can do, is to just like be like, I don't like that person, or I don't like it, or I don't, because, or I'm mad. Those are all words that never came out of my mouth or I allowed myself to express, or even for myself. And so I
Mhm.
think being able to just be like honest with myself with that stuff has been really a lot more helpful in letting that negative stuff or that stuff that people might say about me, it doesn't bother me that much because I know the truth.
Mhm. Mhm. I love that. How can allies best support trans people in their personal lives and in advocacy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is just to be in relationship with us and to listen to us and to learn from us, to watch movies, listen to books. Don't let your trans person in your life be the only like experience or exposure to transness, please get involved politically. Like, I've never been a politics person, but it's impacting us in such like horrible ways that it's just like vote in ways that protect us, like whether it's at the school board or it's like at the city level or like in the bathroom. Like, don't just be a bystander. Like, and I don't know, it's like sometimes I know, like oftentimes people will be like, well, I'll mess with anyone who wants to. And it's like, well, I don't want to go through that, like I don't want to go through having to deal with someone. I don't know, it's just ask. I don't know, it's hard to say, but I would just say, just be in honest relationship with us.
That makes a lot of sense.
On purpose and often.
Amazing. Is there anything else you want to share, Bonnie Violet?
Is there anything else I want to share? I don't know. I appreciate getting an opportunity to talk to you today. I wasn't so sure, and there's a lot about my life. We didn't even go into, you know what I mean? Like, it's like snapshots of things. And so, but it's been helpful for me because I think we speak and we say what we need to say. And we're given opportunities to do that. And so I appreciate getting an opportunity to, I guess, speak my narrative a little bit differently today, because I think that helps me tell myself a better story about who I am and how I am in the world.
I've loved getting to know you, Bonnie Violet. Thank you for this opportunity. I've really learned a lot by hearing your story. So I think it's a gift. I think it's to share any of our truths with somebody, a stranger, and then to make it public, I think is brave. So I'm proud of you. I'm proud of me. I'm proud of both of us for being in recovery and shedding our old skins and finding our identities. I think that is a human desire and a human thing, but I think you've had some extra challenges in your background and your history, and I'm really proud of you for overcoming them and becoming who you are. And I really like this person that you are. So maybe we'll have more conversations following this, but thank you so much for your time today. In the show notes, I'll put all the information so everyone can support you everywhere you are and follow you and vote, and your HIV organization and your trans organization, and be supportive and helpful in every single way that we can.
I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you. And congrats again on 7 years. That's an awesome achievement.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Peripeteia podcast, a talk show for women. Don't forget to download my free ebook, The 12 Truths to Change Your Life. Do it for the plot. We'll see you in the next episode. Lots of love.